The lake was serene and golden in the sunset rays. A hawk skimmed over the glassy surface and gave a shriek that shattered the stillness. I took a swig from my bottle and gulped down the refreshing cold liquid. My fishing rod quivered, but it was a false alarm. I glanced down at the cooler at the left side of my chair. It was already full of trout. The pines that rimmed the lake were thick and dark and filled the air with their scent. I sighed. It was peace in all its perfection. I sensed a subtle change in the air. My ears strained to hear in a quiet that had become so still. Even the wind in the trees had ceased. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and the scent of pines was replaced by something earthy and pungent. I don't understand how I didn't hear it coming up behind me. 60-year-old ears, I guess. But suddenly, a bear came and sat down to my left, about 2 feet away from my chair. I didn't turn my head to look at it fully. I side-glanced it. It was doing the same to me. It was a monster. A grizzly, at least 6 feet, sitting on its haunches, and maybe 1,400 pounds, according to my expert eye. Thick, mud-brown fur covered its massive, muscled shoulders. A vicious scar ran the length of its snout to ear. This was no cub. This was a veteran warrior. I breathed in shallowly, and sweat began to pool and run down my arms and back. I didn't stand a chance. I gripped the armrests of the chair and tried to think straight. The bear stared stoically ahead, seeming to enjoy the pristine beauty of the lake. Very slowly, I reached for the rifle I had propped up on the chair on my right side, and with exaggerated care, drew it across my lap. I placed both my sweaty palms on it, one hand on the barrel and the other on the stock. I turned my head slightly and saw the creature was looking at the weapon. It turned its gaze back to the lake. "You planning on using it?" it rasped. The voice was not quite human in tone, more like a rumble mixed with gravel and power. I felt the blood draining from my head, and I took a deep breath to make sure I didn't pass out. I cleared my throat. "Hope not," I said. We sat and stared at the lake. A bird swooped and plucked a fish out of the blue-gray depths with enviable precision. "Caught a lot today?" the bear asked. I saw it look at my cooler. I flexed my fingers over my rifle. My hands were getting cold. Poor circulation, the doctor says. I hoped they wouldn't cramp up if I needed to move quickly. The bear yawned, and I balked at the sight of its vicious fangs. Man-eater, no doubt about it. It certainly wasn't afraid of me, but it was being cautious, cunning. "Yep, they're really biting today," I said, as casually as I could. "Been a tough season for prey. Desperate times." It turned and stared pointedly at the cooler. It inhaled deeply, and I could have sworn the force of its breath made the cooler shift. Now, I've got a strong belief in fair play, justice, and pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. I believe if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. The way I figured it, I'm the one who put in the long hours in the rain, in the cold, with the mosquitoes and the gnats. "Those are my fish," I said, and slid my right hand under the butt towards the trigger. "Your fish. The bear sounded contemplative. It turned its massive head towards me, and I could see the wide scar that bisected the left side of its face. I felt the sweat break out afresh on my forehead and other body parts. I grit my teeth. I thought I saw menace in those black eyes, but also something like amusement. "Is this your lake too?" it asked. Nope, I admitted. So maybe not your fish. Typical human. It looked away, but I saw the fur bristle along the ridge of its immense shoulders. It was riled up. I wondered if perhaps I could have handled things differently. But there's a right way and a wrong way, and I didn't see how anyone stealing my hard-won trout was the right way. We sat for another 15 or 20 minutes while the tension thickened. What's it waiting for, I wondered. Another breeze swept across the lake, bringing the promise of frost. It suddenly hit me. I had been so wrapped up, keeping an eye on the bear, I hadn't kept the other one on the sky. Night was encroaching rapidly, prime hunting time for predators. It was waiting for dark. I glanced up and saw the Big Dipper was already twinkling at me. I could give you one, I hesitated, loath to compromise. It gave a snort. Way I figure it, bears are expert fishers. You could have had a bigger haul than me if you'd started fishing when you first got here, I muttered. Don't like cold water, it replied. My eyebrows shot up. That's a poor excuse. I was getting annoyed. What kind of bear was this? Some kind of new age Ursa Timidicus? I felt my confidence returning and I eased my finger across the trigger. It would be a mistake to underestimate me, human, the bear said. Night was fully on us. I was going to have to make a move. We only had starlight now and no moon. I wondered if I could squeeze off a shot, grab my cooler, and still make it through the woods with my arthritic knees. Can't outrun it, gotta kill it. I was a good shot, but my hands were locked in cramps now. I wiggled my trigger finger. I don't think it's fair. I did all the work, and then have to give you what I worked hard for. I don't think it's fair you and your kind come into my woods and steal my fish, it replied. Your woods, I protested. I saw the gleam of its animal eyes in the dark. Exactly, it said. So according to this logic, nobody owned the woods and nobody owned the fish. But I deserve to be compensated for the time and effort I put in. My work, my fish. You could share, or I could take it all, the bear said. It rose up on all fours, and I got up from my chair, knocking it over, and raised my rifle. I did pretty good, all things considered. I backed away and took aim between its eyes. It remained motionless, and all I could hear was the sound of its heavy breathing and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. There wasn't enough space between us. My trigger finger was numb with cold. I didn't have the reflexes anymore for this. If it charged... I've always been too stubborn, so says my ex. Maybe I was, but it got me through a rough childhood, an even rougher adolescence, the army, and years of driving tractor trailers. And now, here I was, being too stubborn over 7 trout in a cooler. Maybe I was an old fool. A man's got to commit to doing something with excellence. Sweat burned my eyes, and I could only see the outline of the monster against the darker depths of the trees behind it. I licked my dry lips. I never stood a chance. The bear charged. I got off one shot that must have bounced off its thick skull before it knocked me off my feet and sent me flying backwards several yards. I landed in some brush, every bone and muscle bruised and screaming. I lay winded, and I'm sorry to say, felt some urine escape my bladder. I waited for the end. For agonizingly long minutes I lay there, but nothing happened. I raised my head and saw the bear had overturned my cooler and was eating my trout. I grabbed a handful of dirt and rocks in my hand with rage. "Get away from my fish," I yelled, and tried to sit up. I made it halfway up and got into a sitting position. I threw the dirt in its direction. The injustice of it all bore down on me. The bear leisurely swallowed my trout that had taken so many hours to catch. I saw the massive head turn and regard me. It then ate my last trout. I yelled again. "You're very stubborn. the bear observed. I got painfully to my feet and realized my left leg was sprained or maybe even fractured. The pain made my head spin. "What right did you have to do that?" I shouted. The bear contemplated me. If only I could figure out where my rifle was, I would do the job right. It turned and began to amble off. I couldn't let it go. I hobbled in its direction, hoping along the way I would kick the rifle. I suddenly remembered the torch in my pocket and took it out. Scanning the nearby ground with the thin beam of light, the rifle had been flung close to the water's edge. I did a kind of hop, dragging my left leg. Felt like my shin bone was broken. I grabbed up the rifle and popped the torch between my teeth. I swung around, rifle raised, and scanned where I thought the bear had retreated into the woods. It was right behind me. Sneaky bastard. I caught my breath as the light between my teeth illuminated its gigantic head. It roared, a sound so primal and thunderous it made the rifle fall from my nerveless fingers and the torch drop out of my mouth as I covered my ears. I crumpled to the ground. I couldn't hear anything. My ears were ringing and my vision swam. My head felt like it had been split. I was pretty sure my ears and nose were bleeding. It nudged me with its enormous snout. To my surprise, the sound returned in a rush. I could hear the lapping of the water at the lake's edge and the wind through the pine trees and crickets chirping. I didn't dare look up at it. I kept my head down, my hands covering my ears. "You need to rethink your life choices," the bear said. It turned and lumbered off into the trees. I sat there on the cold, damp ground for about half an hour. Then I used the rifle as a crutch to hobble out of the woods to where my car was parked. To this day, I can't stand the sight of trout.